Always good to see you. How you doing this morning? Is Texas on fire, or did you get some rain, or what's happening?
Believe it or not, Jamie, we might actually get some rain tomorrow. I've heard
Woo.
rumors.
We had one. I mean, it's been dry as a bone here. And the other night, I mean, it was a dry day, hot,
Yeah.
just typical summer in Florida. And man, we got a storm at like 11 o'clock at night that could have been part of a hurricane. I mean, we probably got 6 inches of rain here in
You shared
overnight.
it on Facebook. I saw it. Looked like a gully washer for sure.
It was something, man, and I'm not unhappy. I'll take it.
Well, our yard so needs it, but I'm thinking when we're done with this, I'm probably going to run outside and put a little fertilizer on the yard in hopes that we get rain tomorrow. Although that will probably deter it. The fact that I went out and put fertilizer.
I did water a bunch of plants on the day of the big storm because it wasn't supposed to rain, so I think that had something to do it. If you go out and actually water the plants and get heat stroke, then it's gonna rain.
The other opportunity is maybe wash the car. The last time I did wash the car, we did get rain, and for real, we really did.
And for the next episode of Gardening with Pilots, we'll Hey, we had actually talked about doing a piece on precautionary landings because there's
Yeah,
a whole spectrum of flights. And on the one end, we have that beautiful morning flight or evening flight where the air is still and it's just perfect. And on the other end, you blew a cylinder, you have a fire, something horrible. And that's probably never going to happen to most of us in our career. But somewhere in the middle, that spectrum tightens up, and there's the precautionary landing. You're flying along, and this just doesn't seem right. And maybe it's on airport, maybe it's off airport. We've both had the experience. You
right.
care to tell the story of one of yours?
Well, there have been three. The In no particular order. One is I was in the airplane with a student, and we were about 600 feet or so, and the engine began to cough and make some unusual noises. Um, uh, I took the controls and we turned back the field immediately. This was in an LSA that I had hundreds of hours in, and I'm also a glider pilot, and those two facts um, made me comfortable making a turn back to the airport at 600 feet. And we made it back to the airport just fine. And it turned out that it was a fuel pump issue, and got the fuel pump replaced. And it was really kind of a non-issue. I don't recommend that turn back to the airport certainly not at 600 feet, unless you absolutely know what the performance of your airplane is in a situation like that. But because I did, and because I practiced that on a semi-regular basis anyway, especially when I was teaching a lot, it was really a non-event. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's funny because in flight school and when we're training, we learn diversions. And of course, on your check ride, you're going to get a diversion as a private pilot. But I never really understood why we were doing that. Just that,
right.
somebody says, oh, go over there. But I will tell you, I had one just a few years ago where I was flying from Jack Edwards, Alabama, back to Central Florida, Winter Haven. It's about 370 miles, but the Cessna 152 I was flying had long range tanks, so I had 40 gallons of fuel in an airplane that's burning 5.5, 6 gallons an hour. So I knew I could make it in a straight shot, and I've been away for days, so I kind of wanted to make it home in a straight shot.
Right.
Had a heck of a headwind coming across the panhandle, so I was probably 4 hours and 15 minutes into the flight, just coming up on the Green Swamp. And my home airport's on the other side of the Green Swamp, but that's 40 miles of absolute nothing.
Yeah.
That's not someplace you want to have a problem.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I lost like 300 RPM just out of the blue. And it was running rough, and it wasn't right. And being a cowardly person that I am, I'm like, yeah, I don't think I want to go over the swamp when I get this problem. And luckily, Inverness Airport was just off my left. I mean, 4 or 5 miles away.
Yeah.
So I canceled my VFR flight following. I went to Inverness, and I would be willing to bet it was just carb ice. You're flying
Ah,
along the coast, and it's the humidity of Florida. And yeah, it's warm, but you can still get carb ice. I sat on the ground for about an hour. I could not find a problem, fired it up afterwards, and it flew just fine on the rest of the way home. But having the presence of mind to say, you know what, I'm not going to point B. I know it was point A to point B, but I'm not doing that. I'm going to point C over here or A1 and just
Just
think about it for a minute.
just out of curiosity, did you think to pull the carb ice
I did pull the carb heat,
or
but
carb heat? I mean,
as you know, carb heat takes a while.
yeah,
And, seriously, I was just getting over the beginning of the green swamp, and I thought, I think that's probably what it is because it just all the conditions were right for it.
right.
But at the same time, it's like I don't want to fly 10 minutes out and find out, oh no, it was something else, and now I
Yeah,
can't get back. So,
yeah, yeah. The reason that I ask that is because when things start to go wrong, um, sometimes your brain can kind of go to mush for a minute or so.
mm,
And I was flying back from Dallas several years ago in the Comanche, and it just all of a sudden started running rough periodically. And so I thought, well, maybe there's water in the gas tank. So I switched tanks and it was fine until it wasn't.
mhm.
And then I switched tanks again. And we had four tanks in that airplane, and I went through all four tanks, and every time it fixed the problem for a minute. And I thought, well, it's unlikely I've got water in the tanks, in all four. And then it's like, well, what do I do now? What do I do now? And oh, the checklist. It's crazy how the brain works, but
Oh
that's
yeah.
exactly what happened. Oh, yeah, the checklist. And so I pulled out the checklist and started going through. There's not that much to check, but it turned out when I started testing the mags, one was fine and the other one was like the airplane was shaking apart. And I thought, okay, so it's a bad mag. And I was close to the airport that where my mechanic is, so I decided to divert to that airport and actually called ATC to get flight following because I was still a few miles away. And they were trying to descend me lower than I wanted to go. And finally, I ended up declaring an emergency
Mhm.
because I didn't want to. It's a long story, but the short end of it is I declared an emergency. And ATC basically told me proceed direct to David Wayne Hook's altitude and heading your choice. So I went straight there and landed without incident and taxied over to the mechanic, and it turned out to be a fouled plug, just that simple. But so he cleaned it, put it back in, and 5 minutes later I was on my way again. Not a big deal, but a precautionary landing nonetheless.
I've had that exact same situation, and it is on one hand, it's humbling when you find out it's just a bad plug. But on the other hand, you're in the airplane and something's not right, and you
Yeah,
really do have to trust your gut. Because the first time this ever happened to me, I was flying in Connecticut. It was winter. I was in a 182 with a time building student. She already had her ticket, but she was getting time and getting used to the 182. And we were out in the practice area, and it just didn't feel right. And I, to this day, I cannot put my finger on what the problem was, but
yeah,
we're flying out in the practice area, just doing maneuvers, and it just doesn't feel right. And I suggested we head back to the airport because the sun's starting to set. We got to fly across a ridge line, and I can't even tell you exactly what was wrong. There was a vibration or there was something I just didn't like, and I'm really glad I did that because on final the engine quit.
oh
And, luckily I'm there and the pavement's in front of me. But if I'd been a half mile away when that happened,
yeah,
that would have been a real problem. So
yeah,
sometimes, even if you can't put your finger on it, or you don't want to face the embarrassment of, oh, it was just a
yeah,
fouled plug, go make the precautionary landing.
yeah.
Find a place to go on airport or off airport. And I got to admit, I used to have a chief pilot that made the point making an off airport landing when you still have fuel and options is much better than just flying around being indecisive until you're out of choices.
Out of
And he
options.
would follow it up saying, "You're going to get fired, of course, but at least you're
I'll
on the
keep you
ground."
alive. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, and it actually I had forgotten about this. I don't know if it was buried in my subconscious, but I had forgotten about this. I was actually doing a check ride with an applicant in his personal airplane, and we had just done an emergency descent the scenario was we had an engine fire, and when he applied the throttle at, I don't know, probably 1,500 or 2,000 feet, I gave it back to him. When he applied the throttle, the airplane just wasn't climbing like it had before.
Hmm.
And so we were 5 or 6 miles from a towered field. And so I told him, I said, does that sound right to you? I mean, I didn't know the airplane, but I said, does that sound right to you? Does it feel right to you? No, it doesn't, he said. So I'll tell you what, let's just keep climbing. Let's get some altitude. So we got up to about 3,000 feet, and we could see our home airport in the distance, not too far away. And then the engine started backfiring,
Ah.
and we had another field right off the left wing. And I said to him, I tell you what, let's call it a day on the check ride and let's get on the ground.
Hmm.
And so we called up the tower and told them we had a engine issue. They asked us if we wanted to declare an emergency, and I told them, I said, not right this minute, but we'd like some landing priority, please. Well, he cleared everybody out of the way like it was an emergency anyway. And as we touched down, actually, I told the student, I said, let's do a soft field landing. So we knocked that out of the way. Uh,
That's you.
oh,
Keep the check ride going, even when we're on the verge of
oh, and by the
a
way,
mayday situation.
we also knocked out the engine out of emergency situations. Uh, because it was a real deal. I'm being a bit facetious, um, um, but it turned out to be a cracked cylinder. In fact, the cylinder was cracked almost 3/4 of the way around.
Oh, wow.
So it could have been a catastrophic engine failure if that had let go. So that was probably the I think in almost 12,000 hours of flying, that was the closest that I've come to a mechanical reason for just an outright engine failure.
That's a great point, though, because whether it's something simple like carb ice or a fouled plug or something significant like a cracked cylinder, and basically the cylinder's now leaking, the valves aren't sealing it up, and
Right.
you're losing power. And that every time that piston goes in and out, that crack's getting pushed on. Eventually, it's going to fail completely. Make a decision, find a place to go and go there, because the worst case, you just built a stop in and you probably got to go to the bathroom anyhow. But,
Yeah, and get
you
some
know,
gas.
it adds a half an hour to your flight, but
Yeah,
it's a whole lot better than being in the air when that engine quits or that cylinder comes flying off or something worse happens. And,
yeah.
Pat, because you brought it up, I think we should do an episode down the road about declaring an emergency, because
Oh, good
I think
idea.
people are afraid to do that and they don't realize sometimes that's the thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got a story about that. So yeah, we can talk about that.
All right, I
We
like
can
it.
talk about that. The only other issue that I had was coming back from Dallas. Let's see. Yeah, we were coming back from Dallas, and we just picked up a Citabria that had been totally rebuilt, brand new engine, the whole 9 yards. And flying back about halfway home, the engine just quit. And we landed in the field. Turned out to be a fuel starvation, not fuel exhaustion. We didn't
Mhm.
run out of gas, but there turned out to be a mud dauber in one of the gas lines, and no way to switch back and forth on the Citabria. Once one of the tanks ran dry, the engine quit. Plenty of gas in the other tank, couldn't get it to the engine. But actually, I tell that story at YouTube channel called "In the Hangar," and I think the address right there if anybody's interested in hearing it. But anyway, we fixed the problem, took off from the field, and then took the airplane to the mechanic who fixed it permanently. But that was an outright engine failure due to fuel starvation, and it went all the way to the ground. But the airplane was fine, and we took off out of this farmer's field without uh, any evidence we were ever there, except two tire tracks that stopped and started in the middle of nowhere. So I suspect that guy was thinking, "What alien form landed here?"
This is what I love about this business. You get into aviation, you're going to have stories to tell. Good
Oh
ones, bad ones, funny ones, and almost everything's funny later. But
yeah, later.
yeah, at the moment, it's, as you said, it's that mental lockup. Like, what the heck is going on?
Exactly. Exactly.
Pat, thanks so much. I really appreciate you talking about this topic and sharing your personal experience. A lot of pilots have never had to do a real diversion or a precautionary landing. And I think it's worth saying, hey, if that's what you think you got to do it. It's not so bad.
Yeah, yeah. Not hard to do as long as you practice it, as long as you keep it in the back of your mind.
Pat, thanks so much. I hope you get some rain this evening, and we'll catch up with you next time right here.
Adios.